llenar entonces, de acuerdo al número de la tarjeta, van a llenar el número del documento y obviamente van a correlacionar a qué se pertenecen cada uno de ustedes, van a colocar su número de celular y un correo electrónico. ¿Listo? ¿Claro hasta ahí? Listo, chicos. Entonces me indican, por favor, si ya les llegó al chat de todos ustedes el link para que vayan llenando la asistencia, por favor.
Bueno, profe.
Listo. Entonces ahí vamos a ver un poquito de la vida de Mario Luis Rodríguez Cobos, que es el precursor de este movimiento humanista, al cual cada una de nuestras instituciones, digamos que tienen como ideología principal el humanismo que él generó. ¿Listo? Entonces, cada uno de ustedes va a mirar minuciosamente este pequeño video, ¿sí? De Mario Luis Rodríguez Cobos, ¿sí? Entonces, el ideal es que ustedes realicen el día de hoy como tarea un resumen en una hojita blanca, cuadriculada, ¿sí? Pero tiene que ser hoja porque estas hojas las vamos a ir anexando a una carpetica de trabajo del área de humanismo. ¿Listo? Entonces, vamos a ver este pequeño video de Mario Luis Rodríguez Cobos, en donde vamos a ver por qué fue tan importante los ideales de él, en donde obviamente hizo énfasis a la violencia, en la cual nos vemos envueltos nosotros todos los días, de pronto la discriminación, ¿cierto? Tanto cultural, ¿cierto? Como con respecto a las ideologías. Vamos a ver también un poquito acerca de esas problemáticas sociales, ¿sí? De que ha dejado de pronto la violencia, eh, la expropiación de tierras, ¿sí? Las guerras, cómo de cierta manera han repercutido dentro del ser humano y cómo ha generado esos daños tan fuertes y tan trascendentales de manera directa o indirecta para nuestra humanidad, ¿sí? Y cómo el ideal de él obviamente es curar ese sufrimiento que se segrega obviamente después de que se encuentra uno en medio de una violencia. Entonces, digamos que hago un paréntesis, ¿no? Lo que sucedía hace algunos años en la Guerra de los Mil Días, ¿sí? Con respecto a los partidos políticos acá en Colombia, ¿sí? Como lo fue la guerra que hubo entre el Partido Conservador y Liberal. Vamos a verlo un poquito, ¿sí? Como él es de Argentina, vamos a ver algunas problemáticas de América, ¿sí? Y vamos a ver cómo también se dio la guerra un poquito en Argentina y de hecho cómo esto fue lo que influyó para que Mario Luis Rodríguez Cobos alzara la voz y dijera, no, esperen, miren, hay miles de formas de ver la vida, ¿sí? Y el ideal es que nos la hagamos más armónica y vivamos un poquito en plenitud. Entonces comenzaron a seguirlo a él muchas personas por los ideales en los cuales él incursionó por medio de la psicología, la sociología, la política, la espiritualidad y toda esa parte. Perfecto, listo. Si ya llenaste, entonces voy a compartirles acá el video. ¿Listo? Voy a compartirles muy atentos. Ahí en algunas partecitas que van a tener que leer el texto, ¿sí? El ideal es que estén ustedes todos atentos allí, ¿listo? Entonces vamos a ver un poquito acerca de la vida de este hombre, de Mario Luis Rodríguez. ¿Listo?
Sí,
Entonces,
señora.
también un segundo, ya les comparto el sonido, ustedes me indican si la están viendo. ¿Están escuchando ahí?
Sí, señora.
Perfecto.
In the midst of violent social upheaval, a voice remained down from the mountains, a message of internal peace and the renunciation of violence.
La no discriminación y la no violencia.
Some hailed the rise of a new prophet, a healer. Others denounced him as a false messiah, a danger to youth, a threat to society.
The Ciclo movement became a movement that was seen as dangerous.
His followers persecuted tortured, even killed.
The press did an incredible campaign saying that we were having drugs, we were having orgies, we were having I don't know which satanic practices.
His voice silenced, his words denounced and mocked. Yet somehow, this unpresupposing South American has touched lives all over the planet, from Mali to Montreal, from the poorest slums to the halls of power. Is it possible that this unknown sage really holds the key to an experience that could transform your life? He's a spiritual guide to millions of people all over the world. His ideas have given rise to movements and political parties. His social, literary, and spiritual writings have been published in dozens of languages. How is it that after all that, he remains the best-kept secret of the Andes? It's a story that began many years ago in a remote outpost high in the mountains near the border of Argentina and Chile. Today, thousands have traveled from the most distant points to join Ciclo not far from Aconcagua, the tallest mountain in the Americas. I'm here in the crowd, not only as a filmmaker, but also as one of many pilgrims from around the world who have traveled to this place where three great mountain chains converge. We have made our ways from Africa and the US, from every part of South America, from across Europe and Asia. All of this in response to Ciclo's message that our suffering and contradiction cause violence within us and around us, that creating internal unity ends that violence and produces the conditions for something new: peace, force, and joy. Imagine a spirituality that's not a religion, organizations of volunteers where no one is paid, including the leaders. An inspiration that for some has given birth to social action, for others political organization, and for many a spiritual path.
Hemos peregrinado a este paraje desolado buscando la fuerza que alimente nuestra vida, buscando alegría en el hacer y buscando la paz mental necesaria para progresar en este mundo alterado y violento.
For some, all of this is very new. Others have come to join old friends and colleagues. My path to this place began when I was 20 and first came across Ciclo's writings in a bookstore in Canada. Others have traveled farther and longer. The first time Ciclo spoke here, the rocky landscape was unadorned by buildings. Those who came did so at great personal risk. The first time, no one arrived in such style. The authorities were even less welcoming. The situation was more complicated and more dangerous. It may not be obvious in what a tourist might see today, but by the late 60s, Argentina was being torn apart by military dictatorship, right-wing hit squads, left-wing guerrillas, and everything in between. The cultural and political upheaval of that moment wasn't unique to South America. Riots and insurgency, revolution and protest were the reality from Malaysia to Ohio. In that overwrought environment, stories spread down from the mountain of an extraordinary young man. Drawn by curiosity or hope, guided by rumor or intuition, they sought him out, looking for a healer, a guru, or a guide. By 1969, Ciclo was living far from the centers of power in a small stone hermitage that he had constructed some miles from the outpost of Punta de Vacas. Even here, in the isolation of the mountains, the local military would often disturb his meditations by taking pot shots at him, just for fun. In the midst of the social and political turbulence, word of Ciclo continued to spread, and after persistent requests, he finally agreed to leave his mountain retreat and speak to a group of people in the city. Though permits were granted, the crowds were arrested before the events began. It was a pattern that repeated until it was finally announced that Ciclo was certainly free to speak if he wanted to speak to the rocks. He was told that he'd be welcome to return to his hermitage and speak to all the people who wanted to join him there. On May 4th, 1969, the same summer humans first walked on the moon, despite the fact that it was so far off the beaten track, despite the frigid weather, despite the heavily armed soldiers, a few hundred pilgrims made their way to this distant place to hear Ciclo speak publicly for the first time. His words must have surprised those who came to hear a Messiah or a healer.
A escuchar un hombre de quien se supone se transmite la sabiduría, has equivocado el camino, porque la sabiduría no se transmite por medio de libros ni de arengas. La sabiduría está en el fondo de tu conciencia como el amor, está en el fondo de tu corazón.
The talk that Ciclo gave that day lasted perhaps 20 minutes.
Desconocedor de las leyes que rigen el universo,
It focused on the nature of pain and suffering,
desconocedor de las leyes de la historia,
the varied forms of violence, the relation between the violence inside of us and the violence around us. At the heart of it was the tale of a traveler who had lost his way, a story of suffering and pleasure, of need and desire, and the possibility of a profound change. And somehow, despite all the difficulties, his message spread, by word of mouth, by flyers and posters, by every means imaginable, even as a comic book. Ciclo spoke here 30 years later, in 1999.
Aquí estamos de nuevo.
It was then that the stainless steel pillar was raised to commemorate his first talk. He spoke here again in 2004, and then in 2007. But over all that time, his message has remained unchanged.
Y bueno, y es la ciencia y es la justicia la que puede mejorar el dolor humano. Pero el sufrimiento humano es mental. Y el sufrimiento humano no se soluciona ni por el desarrollo de la ciencia, ni por el desarrollo de la justicia. Es un esfuerzo que tiene que hacer el ser humano para entrar en otras regiones de la mente. Ese es nuestro tema.
Learn to treat others in the way that you want to be treated. Learn to surpass pain and suffering in yourself, in those close to you, and in human society.
Harmless stuff. You might think so, but it provoked a ferocious attack from the press, religious leaders, and the dictatorship, from the right and the left, a wave of slander and misinformation that would lead to Cicloists being attacked, jailed, and even murdered. The same pattern would later be repeated in Europe and North America, denounced by the media and ideologues from across the spectrum, accused both of being a cult and anti-religious, communists and fascists, members ostracized, meeting centers defaced, one in Paris was burnt down, and in the States another was bombed. In 2007, a major Cairo paper denounced Cicloists as Zionists and dangerous outsiders. That short talk that irradiated from this mountain pass, heard by so few, provoked outrage and controversy. However, after all these years, surely we don't need to speculate. We can judge Ciclo's message by the fruits it's borne.
Learn to resist the violence that is within you and outside of you. Learn to recognize the signs of the sacred within you and around you.
It was a message that would be heard in the most distant points, transforming many lives, mine among them. But none of that would happen without real risks to some of us. Among her many accomplishments as Undersecretary of State in the Chilean government, Pia Figueroa was responsible for creation of that country's first national environmental legislation. This mother of two has followed a long path to this place.
I wanted to come here when I was 15, imagine, to hear Ciclo here on 1969, but I wasn't able.
Not long before, a young Pia had first heard about Ciclo.
Under the door of my house, it came a small leaflet, very small, I remember, with the image of Ciclo. It said, "My teachings are not for the successful, are for those ones that carry failure in their hearts." And I felt that that was what I had in my heart.
Where the choices for change seem to be self-absorption and drugs or armed struggle, Ciclo's call for nonviolent personal and social transformation touched some deeply, but went very much against the current of the times.
I remember once in my friend's house, she was having the guns hidden in, under her bed. I mean, that was the kind of options we were taking. Maybe if I would have taken the choice of a violent revolution, maybe my parents would have understood better.
Her father's reaction wasn't surprising, considering the baseless and vicious slander accusing Ciclo and the Ciloists of every crime.
Listo, chicos. ¿Me están escuchando ahí?
Sí,
Sí.
señora.
Sí,
Perfecto.
señora.
Entonces,
Sí,
ustedes
señora.
hoy de tareita les va a quedar a terminar de ver el videíto, ¿listo? Vuelvo, les dejo el link para que lo vean, lo visualicen desde su casa y les queda esta semanita para que realicen el resumen. ¿Perfecto? Entonces, nos vemos dentro de 8 días y nada.
Profe, y una pregunta, ¿uno dónde envía las tareas a su merced, las
Ok,
califica?
las tareas las vamos a revisar al finalizar el proceso. Por eso les indicaba yo a ustedes que en hojitas, igual nosotros vamos a ir socializando todo en clase. ¿Listo?
Nosotros vamos a ir haciendo las tareas, su merced a final de periodo se podría decir que no la revisa.
Sí, digamos que ustedes las van a leer, entonces yo digo, no, cámbiale de tal cosa o cámbiale de tal otra y ya. ¿Listo?
Ah, bueno, señora. Gracias.
Perfecto. Feliz fin de semana. Cuídense mucho, muchachos.
Bueno, señora, gracias.
Hasta luego, profe.
Ah, chicos. Feliz mañana.
Chao, profe.